Welcome back to the Religious Treehouse. I'm Jody.
And I'm Matthew.
How are you doing today, Matthew?
I am doing good. It's been nice out. I've been able to exist with my doors open and windows open, so it's been real nice over in North Carolina here. At least for now. It was been storming. We've had tornado warnings and stuff. But today it's going great. So I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I started my day off with a bagel sandwich and hot chocolate, and that is how I prefer to start my days.
Yeah, no, I always try to start my day with a bagel at least if I can. So ideal start to a day.
And now we get to continue this wonderful day by talking about the Apocrypha.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for this conversation. We're going into the Apocrypha or the Deuterocanonical works, so that's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's if you're Catholic, this is going to be part of your regular Bible. If you're Protestant, you're going to be like, what are these things? This isn't part of my Bible, but I'm excited for it. Yeah,
Deuterocanonical?
Deuterocanonical.
Deuterocanonical. What does that
Right.
mean?
Okay, so Deutero means second,
Mm.
and canonical second canon. So this is um, the the second canon, a different. Uh, I guess let's just get into it. In a lot of Bibles, we have the Old Testament, and then you'll have a Middle Testament called the Apocrypha. Sometimes, if you're Protestant, or the Deuterocanon, if you're Orthodox or Catholic, or another group of Christians that considers that scripture. And then you have the New Testament. So the Deuterocanonical works are in the middle, and they're typically considered the same level of scripture as Old Testament, New Testament, and stuff like that, but are written in a separate time period. So the Deutero being second doesn't denote status as being lesser or anything like that per se, but it does denote that it's written in a second time period. But in practice, I think that the Apocrypha is generally less used. There's your canon, there's your biblical canon. This is my Bible, and then there's the verses that are often referred to in religious practice. And there are definite verses and passages that are heavily referred to from the Apocrypha in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. But I think there's the hits, the classics that are in the Old Testament, the New Testament, that are much more, generally speaking, broadly speaking, um, used. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so they're still considered part of the scripture. They just didn't really have a place to fit into, or because of the time period in which they were written, they need to remain separate from the other things.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk about that. So if you look at our oldest translations of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, the Vulgate, they include these apocryphal works in it, and they're intermixed. They're part of the Old Testament. However we define that. And then we get around to Martin Luther in the 16th century. Martin Luther, when he translated the Bible into German, he included the group between the Old and New Testaments that he labeled as the Apocrypha, which in Greek means something like hidden or obscure. And to Luther, those books were not equal to Scripture. He saw those as lesser, but they still saw them as useful and good to read. I think the famous parallel he used was comparing them to a flower. They're beautiful to smell. So in Luther's Bibles, in the first Protestant Bibles, the Apocrypha was always included, even though had a lesser status. And the reason for that is because Luther wanted to harken back to the Masoretic text. He said, we want the Jewish scriptures for the Old Testament to be the same for us. So because these texts aren't in the Masoretic text, aren't used in Jewish traditions, he kind of took it out as a side and put it in their own little area.
And why aren't they used in Jewish traditions?
Oh, just how the canon worked out. I'm sure we'll have an episode at some point on the canonicity of different texts of Hebrew Bible and New Testament and how all of those came together. But these texts were probably well, at least some of them were originally written in Greek. For the longest time, we thought these were always written in Greek, and then we're finding, as time goes on, and we find more things. We find that some of them might have origins in Semitic languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, stuff like that. So that could be one reason they weren't written in Hebrew. Uh, they might just not have been popular when the Bible was canonized for these Jewish groups. Uh, but and there's books like the Maccabees that talk about Judaism and Jewish practice that still hold importance in Judaism. Like that's where we get Hanukkah from, stories from Maccabees, but it's not part of Scripture.
Okay. How do Jewish people feel about the Apocrypha? Do you know?
I think similarly to the New Testament, general indifference. Like it's an old text that like is written. It's an old Jewish text, like the New Testament written by Jews primarily. So it's a Jewish text, and so the Apocrypha, I would assume, holds similar standing. It's like it's an old important text that some Jewish people are like, okay, well, we should study this and learn about religion during first or second temple period, but it doesn't hold like scriptural value.
Okay, because anything in like the Tanakh is what holds scriptural value.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So then the people who recognize the Apocrypha, who would you categorize those people to be? Because I just, with our background, I'd never heard of the Apocrypha
Mhm.
until we started doing this podcast.
Yeah.
So where is it the most popular, I guess?
Yeah. So Catholics and Greek Orthodox, those type of churches. It's really the Protestant Reformation that came along with Martin Luther. Martin Luther said, no, we don't want these texts to be considered scripture. That's why he separated them off and he said these are different. And then as time goes on, bring printing prices down and stuff like that. And like we don't want these texts, we want to distance ourselves from Catholicism a little more. Protestants remove them from the Bible because if it's not scripture, we don't really need it in there. Or that's how the argument goes. I'm simplifying a lot. We can talk about that more a lot later. I think we have a King James episode that we're planning in a few months, so I'm sure that will come up then. But no. So Protestants generally, there's some exceptions as always, but Protestants say no to the Apocrypha. Catholic and Orthodox say yes to it. And different traditions have different groups that they include in the Apocrypha. It's not like this is a set book among all people. Ezra's and four Ezra's and stuff like that. Some groups have, some groups don't. So for the most part, like if you find a Catholic Bible, that's going to have texts that most traditions have. But if you're Orthodox, you might have a few different ones. If you're a Ethiopian church, it's going to have all sorts of books in there that have like all of them. That's going to be the book that's going to be the tradition that has the most books considered in their canon, probably.
Okay.
Does that
That's
make
cool.
sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I just feel sad for the Apocrypha for being forgotten sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's and they're good texts. And I should note, I most of my studies are in Hebrew Bible and stuff like that. So most of my studies are in the Tanakh, and stepping into the Apocrypha to me is like stepping into the New Testament. Like I know stuff about it, like I can talk about it, but I'm not nearly as confident talking about it as say like Genesis or Jonah. But no, definitely, I'd say we're talking about Bell and the Dragon today, which is in addition to the Book of Daniel. And I would say Bell and the Dragon is the apocryphal text that I'm most comfortable speaking with. So that'll be exciting, and it's a great text.
And what was Bell and the Dragon written in?
So that one was Greek, probably. I don't think we have any attestations of it being in a Semitic language, to my knowledge, at least. There's two main versions that get tossed around of Bell and the Dragon. It's going to be the Old Greek, which is in the Septuagint, and then the Theodotian version. The Old Greek, the Septuagint is probably older, but the Theodotian is generally what's used in translations, at least in my experience. It's what the NRSV uses. And it resembles more closely the Masoretic text, the rest of Daniel at least. So that could be like one reason why that text is used. But it's probably a revision of the Greek of the Old Greek and the Septuagint. I think some people have tried to argue that it has um, allusions to Semitic languages, like it might have started as a Semitic language, but I haven't seen anything with like confidence saying that.
And is Bell and the Dragon, one of those stories that has multiple authors going into it. Do we know how many authors?
Yeah, well, it's short. It's one chapter. It's chapter 14 of Daniel. So the book of Daniel um, in the Masoretic text in Hebrew is 12 chapters, and in the Greek version we have three different editions. There's one that's usually added around chapter 3. We get an edition of Susanna, that's usually chapter 13, and Bell and the Dragon is chapter 14. And the Bell and the Dragon narrative has kind of three main points. We have Daniel with Bell, Daniel with the dragon, and then Daniel in the lion's den, part 2. So the first two narratives are like for sure together. Like I wouldn't say for sure, but when you get to the Daniel and the lion's den part 2, it might be a different structure, might be a different author. It's all been edited together, so it's not entirely clear. But this is probably from it probably originated in the cycle of Daniel stories. So we see this in Daniel 1 through 6, especially, where Daniel shows up and he does a story, and it's these court narratives where we see this in Joseph, where a lowly guy ends up being high in a court. We see this in Esther, same thing. A lowly woman ends up with a high position of authority, and that's the same thing that's happening in Daniel. And we get different versions of this and different stories. So there's probably a cycle that like use Daniel as a main character, and traditions kind of merge them together and edit all of the stories together.
Okay. Because it is a little bit Daniel and the Lion's Den part 2. And
Yeah.
if it was in the Tanakh, I just want to make sure I am learning things. It would be considered in the Ketuvim part, right? If it had
Yeah.
been included.
No, that's a good question. So, as we've mentioned, the difference between the Tanakh, the Jewish ordering of the Bible, and the Old Testament, if we want to call it the Christian ordering of the Bible, one of the main differences is where we place Daniel. So in the Tanakh and the Jewish traditions, Daniel is placed in the Ketuvim, in the writing section, where it's kind of, a hodgepodge of things that don't fit in with the law or the prophets. Daniel's just kind of there alongside Esther, alongside the Song of Songs, alongside those types of writings. But in Christian traditions, Daniel is placed amongst prophets. So Christians see Daniel as a prophetic figure. That's probably because of the Son of Man language that's used in Daniel a lot. And Jesus also uses that in the New Testament. And it's also apocalyptic. Daniel is a piece of apocalyptic literature, which, talks about eschatological issues and stuff like that, end of the world things every once in a while. So kind of looking forward in that sense. So Christians read that as being prophetic, as opposed to Jews.
But Daniel doesn't follow the prophetic call narrative, does he?
No, I don't think Daniel is called a prophet. If like he's so in Daniel 1, he's called as like a priest or um, comparable at least to the priests of Babylon. And he kind of plays a similar role there, but I don't think Daniel's ever referred to as a prophet. I could be wrong. Someone check me on that, but I'd be fairly certain that he's not.
Yes, someone check and then email. So, can we get into the story now?
Yeah, I think so. In the Apocrypha, I think we should note that's not in a single style or collection. This is written, the Apocrypha as a whole, probably written between 200 BCE and 100 CE ish. And it often reflects issues that are important to Jews of the time, mainly that God won't abandon Jews who maintain their religious practice. And it shows like positive messages in adversary. And so, things like that. And they engage with Greek philosophies and things like that. So it's very much a product of its time, as all texts are. But we can see how it exists in that culture. With Bell and the Dragon being connected to apocalyptic literature, it also has this added context of being part of this war between divine beings. So we see that a lot in Bell and the Dragon. We see this spiritual war, per se, between Bel and between the God of Israel. So that kind of makes, and I should note the dating of Bell and the Dragon is not exactly precise. I've seen estimates as early as like 100 BCE and as late as second century CE. So yeah, it's that general area that we're talking about of turmoil and stuff, but like Second Temple Judaism, kind of.
Yes, that makes sense. I'm just ready to get into the slap fight that is this piece of writing.
No, yeah, it's great. I think that's all I have to say before we get into it. And I'm sure if things come up, I'll mention it while we talk about it. So yeah,
It's
let's get
very
started. Do you want to give us a summary of it's a one
sure.
chapter thing, so it might be fast, but if you want to give us a summary and then we can compare your summary as we go through it a little more slowly.
I would love to give a summary. First things first, the Persians, they defeat the Babylonians, correct? They take over. This is after the Babylonians destroy the second temple? First
Yeah.
temple. First temple.
Okay, so yeah, so we're introduced with Cyrus the Persian, which
Mm.
means that this story is taken after the Persian defeat of the Babylonians.
Yes. Okay. So the Persians have defeated the Babylonians, everyone. And the king is like, hey, this Babylonian god is kind of cool. I'm going to worship him. But he had his homeboy Daniel with him. And his homeboy Daniel's like, this dude, this thing isn't real. He's not actually drinking the food and wine these people leave. And the king's like, prove it. And so then Daniel does. And they discovered that it was actually the priests and their wives and their children who were eating all the food and drinking the wine, and they did that through a really fun way that we'll talk about later. And then the king's like, well, I'm going to worship this dragon they have. And Daniel's like, this dragon is not a god. So then Daniel feeds the dragon really gross stuff, and the dragon bursts. And that's a gross image. And then Daniel is thrown in the lion's den again, a second time.
Not again.
I had a penny for every time Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. I would have 2 pennies. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Uber Eats happens, and then
Wow, you
Daniel is
stole my
rescued.
joke, Jody. You stole my joke. You know that was my joke, but that's
I
fine.
did.
I'll let you have it.
I
I'll let you
did.
have it.
I'm sorry. It's been on my mind ever since. Oh, you'll say it again later and better.
For
But
sure.
yeah, that's Bell and the Dragon. As this,
Fantastic. Yeah, no, let's get into it. And again, we're doing like I always feel like we're doing like a little Bible study with this. Like, okay, let's go verse by verse, talk through it. But I think with something as short as this, that's like the easiest way to kind of talk about it and give us a good run through. And if you haven't read this before, it's short. It's like 3 pages in my Bible, 2.5 really. So it's a quick read
pause
and
and
it's a
come
fun
back.
read.
If you haven't read it and you want to read it real quick before we get into it, really pause and come back. And Matthew, just accept it. It's a Bible study right now. It's fine.
I guess. But
Okay.
yeah, so we were first identified as a king who died, and then Cyrus the Persian succeeded to his kingdom. So this is the Persian king. We're given some backstory to Cyrus, I guess, who's then never mentioned again. The rest of this book is just the king, the king. So we get a first little mention of him at the beginning, and then it's just this generic king figure that we're talking about for the rest of it, which is like, okay, cool. And Daniel is close with the king, right? He's buddy buddy with the
He's a
king.
companion.
Yeah, so he's like, this is the end of Daniel. This is chapter 14. So he's kind of up there and like in the high courts and stuff. He's friends with the king, as we saw in the earlier the earlier chapters of Daniel.
They're besties.
Yeah, best friends with the king. Maybe not, but there is a relation that they have with each other for sure. So yeah, and then Daniel talks to the king, and the king's like, "Why don't you worship this guy?" Because what's assumed is well, first off, Daniel's in diaspora right now. Daniel's not in Judea. He's out in other areas. And what usually happens if you're conquered by a neighboring country is you start worshiping their gods and stuff like that. That's just how it goes. It's like, okay, fine, you guys won. It's kind of a symbol of like, hey, your God beat our God, so now we'll worship your God, because that's what happens. It's how these wars are kind of perceived. So it's kind of weird for Daniel to not be worshiping the Babylonian God. So the Persian king's like, what's up with that?
But like,
Daniel,
wouldn't they want him to worship the Persian god? Why aren't they inflicting the Persian gods upon them?
yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. So this is Babylonian God that we're referring to. I'm pretty sure. So Bel, if you've heard of Baal, I'm sure that's a name that you're familiar with from Old Testament stuff.
Or from our first episode,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So Baal is the Babylonian god, and in our first episode, we talk about Marduk a little bit in maybe that was our second episode, but in the creation narrative of Genesis 1 is kind of formulated around or responding to uh, the story of Marduk and Tiamat, which I think this story is doing as well. And I think that'll come up more later as we talk about the dragon. But yeah, so Bel, Baal, Marduk, we can all kind of think of them as similar, if not the same character that we're familiar with from previously in the Bible. Um, but yeah, Daniel says, because I don't revere idols made with hands, but the living God. And this is a slash. This is saying, oh, your idols are made of by hands and they aren't living. Ha ha, neener, neener. That's what's going
shady.
on there.
He's being
And
so shady.
yeah, yeah. Daniel is definitely instigating here. So what happens is Daniel um, says, well, what if, how can I prove this to you? I'll prove to you that this is a fake God, that he's not a living God. He doesn't actually eat. And the king says, okay, fine. That's the deal. We'll do it. So they go in, do their thing, and Daniel puts a bunch of ash on the ground around all the food and stuff so that when they, because the idol eats at night when everyone's away from the idol. And they leave it, the king seals the door shut. And at night, the priests and all their families, and they have this big old feast, eating all the meal of Bel, and then they go out through their secret entrance. The next day, the king comes back in, and he sees all the footprints and goes, "Oh no, it was all the priests and stuff eating the food, not actually Bel. This is tragic." So he gives Bel and the temple over to Daniel, and then Daniel destroys it.
And it's important to note that they came in through a back door
Yeah.
because the king had sealed the front door with a signet ring.
Right, yeah. So it's like proof that like, hey, this is fake. And I feel like we see this a lot today too in angry Christian um, comment sections, like against other religions, like your God is fake and this is why. Like this is a very common thing that we see 2,000 years later. Like your God is fake. So yeah, it's a tale very very old. But yeah, so that's the first kind of narrative section. Do you have any thoughts or questions on that before we move on?
Um, Listen, I mean, Daniel could have stuck with the status quo and just been like, I could do this, I could worship this guy, but he stuck to his guns. Um, I feel very bad. All of these men, women, and children were just trying to eat, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think they were trying to eat. I think they were generally well off. But the point is that they needed to get rid of the food. There's like, okay, there's this food here. It needs to be eaten by someone. This is the claim that the author of Daniel is making. Like, obviously, the food needs to be eaten by someone. It's not that they were like hungry and like in need of food. It was that what they needed to get rid of the food somehow, and they do that by having a big old feast.
it's not showing the Babylonians in a very good light.
Right, and that's very intentional. That's definitely what they're trying to do. So, moving on to the next narrative, unless you have another thought.
No, all good.
Cool. So next up we have the dragon, which is maybe a serpent, maybe a dragon. I don't speak Greek, so I'll come back to me in a few years when hopefully I know Greek by then, and we can talk about the intricacies of this being a dragon or a snake. But it's this dragon snake like feature, which like are the similar like dragon snakes, essentially the same thing. Oh, and the king said, like, you can't deny that this is a living God, so worship him because it's a snake. You see a big snake, it's living. You might as well worship it.
Who was
And Daniel said,
handling the snake is my question.
Yeah, well, it's a god. Who would handle a snake? It's a god, Jody. You don't handle a snake. It's a god.
So they just let the snake run around in a building or something?
Listen, I don't know how it works. I don't know what
There's
they
very
were
little
doing with the
details.
snake. But the idea in this story is that the serpent or the dragon's much more fun. I'm going to call it a dragon. Is that the dragon is this living god that they worship? And Daniel says that's no living god. I'll kill it without using a what did he say? Without a sword or club. Yeah. And the king's like, all right, go for it. So Daniel took some pitch, fat, and hair and made it into a little cake and he fed it to the snake. And then the snake ripped open and died. Problem solved.
Just
Not a god.
didn't just rip open, it says it burst open.
Yeah, burst open.
Burst. Like a
Burst.
pimple. Burst. Because it was so full of food it couldn't its body couldn't handle it, which is like animal cruelty, number
Yeah.
one. Number two, who was making these pitch fat hair cakes? Ugh.
Yeah. No, I think the idea here is that like a living god, a real god, would be able to handle that, would be able to eat it. Obviously, this is not a real living god because it couldn't handle this, couldn't eat it.
So because it's a real living God, it should be able to process these things that aren't meant to be eaten.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the idea of it. I think that's what the author is getting after. Is like a real god would be able to eat such a meal, but since the dragon burst open, it's not going to happen. It doesn't work. Not a real god. Whoopee! Daniel wins yet again. Again, instigating the fight.
So Daniel's an instigator. The Babylonians are trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes,
Mm.
and the Persians are there.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is much more of a neener towards Babylonians. The Persians are generally in seen in a good light in this story.
Like it feels like Daniel's just trying to slam dunk on the Babylonians no matter what. Just
Yeah,
like
no,
your God made of by hand, not real. Your living God, not real. Neener, you suck.
no. That's definitely what's happening here. It's the how can we create a narrative that has that gives authority and power that makes us feel good, that makes us that gives us some sense of like, okay, we're good and you're not. And by showing that these gods are have been defeated, lifts up the Israel's view of God.
Like this is coming across as a rage text because this has some separation from the destruction of the temple, right? Like this wasn't shortly after.
No, no, this is well after. Like I don't. When this was written, like the Babylonians probably didn't have much to do with like whoever was writing this. So this is deep into the Persian period for sure.
Okay. So this is someone expressing all of their emotions, getting them all out.
Yeah, and so and which is why you can get away with text like this because the powers that the competing narrative, which would be the dominant narrative of in the Babylonian culture, wouldn't be there to see you spreading this and squashing you because they're like, this is bad. We don't want this anti-Babylonian slander. So because this is written, much likely written later and outside of Babylonian control, that's why this text can gain traction and spread.
We love to see it. We love to see it. This is like some
Yeah.
schoolyard taunting.
Yeah. And the fact that there's a dragon here isn't unique. Like I think we should note that like this isn't like, oh, there's a dragon in the Bible. Like I think we see a dragon, or at least the idea of a dragon or a monster of some sort, pop up throughout the Hebrew Bible. The Leviathan specifically, I think of as being monstrous and dragon-like, kind of, except in the sea. But in Genesis 1, as we're doing the creation, the first creation narrative, as the Bible is kind of responding to the Marduk and Tiamat story. That's kind of what we have here too, where Marduk splits open Tiamat's body, and that's how he creates the skies and the land and stuff and the waters and all that. I think that's kind of what this is responding to, as like these are the characters that we're familiar with from those stories, and just as Tiamat was split open, Daniel also split up Tiamat, kind of showing more power over them.
I love that so much. And I have two tangents. Do you want my Noah's Ark tangent again? Or do you want my anthropology tangent on dragons real quick?
Go on whichever one you'd like.
Well, I just think it's so cool how so many different like cultures like that didn't have contact with each other each had their own like idea of dragons. Like dragons is something that is like kind of it feels universally agreed upon. Like if you look at like Aztec stuff, like they have depictions of dragons. You look at Chinese like old scrolls or like the but depictions of dragons are like
Mm.
in almost every culture if you look back in their history. And I think it's very cool.
Yeah, no, I think, my gut feeling is why that is. Don't quote me on this. I don't know. This is outside my area. But if you can think of a big flying snake, like that's pretty darn scary. That's like this one of the scariest things you could imagine. So like it makes sense that like similar concepts would be popping up in places.
Or were dragons real and wiped out during the great flood of Noah's Ark? And this is what I want you all to think about today. Because you know what? Maybe God told Noah, don't put them on the ark, don't take any eggs. And they were just wiped out in the flood. Because that's a theory I've heard.
By who? Who?
Message boards, Matthew. I'm
Of
not
course,
telling you.
of
I am
course.
not telling you. Also, it was depicted in a cartoon.
Oh,
There's a
okay. So it
cartoon
must be real.
depiction of Noah's Ark. But I've actually heard people genuinely say this is a theory, which is why people find like dragon bones or with dragon bones, but it's usually just a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
It's just a
Or
dinosaur.
yeah. Or I feel like I don't even feel like we have to go that extreme. It could be an elephant or something. It's a bone, and I feel like people will just be like, "Oh, that was Bigfoot." Like, no, it was Joe, and Joe died.
No,
Oh,
but Bigfoot is Kane.
yeah, that's another tangent. But no, we need to do an episode on the Noah narrative because there's so much going on there that but aside from dragons being a part of it, apparently that is just so misunderstood. And oh my goodness, no, no, no
Okay.
dragons. I'm going to speak on behalf of the podcast here, uh, and maybe you'll disagree with this, but I think it's going to be a stance that I'm going to force you to take. Is that dragons aren't real?
Oh, oh, we are not taking that. You are only 50% of this podcast, sir. There's only a there's so now guys, there's a 50-50 chance this podcast thinks dragons are real. You know the Loch Ness monster? She's a water dragon.
Okay,
Okay, and the loch is her summer home.
this has turned into a conspiracy theory podcast. This is what we're trying to go against, Jody. We're trying to say, hey, there's conspiracy theories out there. Don't listen to them. And now you're bringing the conspiracy theories here.
Do you want me to upset you and get you back on track at the same time?
I guess.
Do you love the way Belle and the Dragon is structured, like the way they split up the verses or what?
Okay, this is going to upset me because I think like if you read the NRSV version, it splits it up into three sections, which I think is right. You have the Daniel and the Priest of Bel, and that's like there's a little break there, and it's like okay, cool. That's when like that narrative ends, and then we move into the dragon, and where we stop talking, I think, is where the dragon narrative should stop. But and then that's when the lion story should start because we're talking verse 23 through 27. I think that's the dragon narrative. And we start in verse 28. When the Babylonians heard about it, they were very indignant and conspired against the king. And I think, and then they ask for Daniel to get thrown into the lion's den. Like, we need to get rid of Daniel. That's where the lion's den narrative starts. I don't think this is important, but I think this is important because I hate how so many Bible translations that NRSV included, or at least in the study versions of it, they have titles. Like, I don't think we should be titling texts that aren't there. Like it gives these, you know, summaries, brief summaries of saying this is how the text should be structured. When a lot of times that's not how the text is structured. And that's a rant that I'm going on. But in my opinion, in my professional opinion, this should be structured verse 1 through 22, verses 23 through 27, and verse 28 through the end in the Theodotian version. If you're looking at the old Greek version, I don't know how that's numbered. but the generally accepted the NRSV numbering of these verses. I think that's how we should be doing it. And this is a tangent. This isn't important. It's just something I feel passionately about.
I just don't think the label should be there at all because it's all Bell and the Dragon. It's all one story. Like
No, it's three
continuous.
stories.
It
In the
is
title.
all one story. It is one story, three trials.
Okay. But even in the title, Bell and the Dragon, that's two of the stories. We have the story of Bell, and then we have the story of the dragon, and then we also have Daniel and the Lions Den. That's story
Part
number
two.
3. Part 2.
Part two. It's I would have 2 nickels. It's not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. No, it's so weird because when you get into this next part, he's thrown into a lion's den again. Who
Yeah.
gets thrown into 2 lions' dens?
Yeah, so what happens is the Babylonians heard about like Daniel being all destructive of Bel and the dragon, so like, well, let's throw him into the lions, and they force the king to do it. The king is very reluctant because again, we're like good on you Persians. We're not that upset at you Persians. Um, so they throw Daniel into the lions den for 6 days, uh, which and then they don't feed the lions. They say get hungry lions, so you eat Daniel, and then Habakkuk comes in, which is it's one of my favorite cameos of all time. I love Habakkuk. Habakkuk, if you don't know, is a minor prophet. Minor, not in the sense that he's unimportant, but minor in the sense that his book is only 3 chapters long in the Old Testament, and the God and the how does the translation say? Angel of the Lord,
Yeah.
angel of the Lord, angel of God. Interesting. I'd like to look into how that's translated. That's a different conversation. The angel of the Lord comes along and picks up, and it says, Habakkuk, hey, Habakkuk, you need to go feed Daniel. And Habakkuk's like making stew for some farmers or out there. And so the angel picks up Habakkuk by his hair and makes him travel, carries him over to Daniel because Habakkuk's in Judea, carries him over and is like, give the food to Daniel. This is the first instance of Uber Eats, which is so funny. It just exists in the Bible that we're like Uber eating some stew to Daniel who's in the lion's den. And gosh darn it, I got my joke in that you stole, Jody.
I'm so sorry. It's just been living in my head rent free because you're so right. This is Uber Eats. This is, in fact, Postmates. Because Uber Eats wasn't even the first Uber Eats. Postmates was the first Uber Eats.
We're door dashing some stew to Daniel.
How dare you bring them into this conversation?
Anyways, feel free to sponsor us, guys. Uber Eats, Postmates, DoorDash, sponsor this podcast, please. Oh, but Habakkuk gives Daniel the food, and Daniel's like, "Oh my goodness, God, you've remembered me. Thank you so much for remembering me, God." Completely ignoring Habakkuk. Habakkuk is like not Daniel's concern at all. To Daniel, he's just some dude with stew. He doesn't care about him.
Who's being dragged by his hair?
Yeah.
He's not even being held comfortably. The angel is not grabbing him under the arms and lifting him up. No, he's just grabbing him by the crown of his head and holding him up in the air. That's wild.
It's a beautiful image. I love that image. It's one of my favorite like mental pictures in my brain of like the entire Bible. It's just like okay, come with me.
Also, Habakkuk is holding hot stew. Like you have to assume the stew is hot. It's not like he's carrying something cool that if it spills, you're like, oh no. It's like, it's burning my skin.
Yeah. So Habakkuk feeds Daniel, or at least tosses him the stew. I don't know. Gets Daniel the stew. Daniel's like, "Thanks, God, I can eat now. I've been sustained." And then the next day, on the 7th day, again, I think that's an intentional reference to Genesis 1, like where Daniel's in there for 7 days, and this whole story has kind of been like dealing with the competing narrative of Genesis 1, what Genesis 1 is competing against. So I feel like that's intentional.
Yeah.
The 7th day, King comes back. He's like, "Oh my goodness, Daniel, you're still alive." And Daniel's like, "Of course I'm still alive." So he pulls Daniel out and throws in the people that accused Daniel, and then those people got eaten by the lions immediately. And that's the story of Daniel in the lion's den again.
Were they thrown in the lion's den, the people that accused Daniel the last time in part 1?
I don't think so.
Oh. So there's some
I
differences.
could
I
be
mean,
wrong. Oh,
the
yeah, no, there's
Habakkuk.
definite differences. Um, so Daniel in the first one, he's in there for 1 day, so it's a 1 day long problem. In this one, he's in there for 6 days, obviously. And in the first one, it's it's the people instigating against Daniel. It's saying, "Hey, Daniel, you better worship our God." And Daniel's like, "Nah, I'm gonna worship my God." Whereas the roles kind of reversed here. Daniel is like going out of his way to denigrate the bell and the dragon, and the people are like, in response to that, we need to get rid of this Daniel guy because he's destroying our cultic practices. We need to get rid of this. So I think those are the two main differences. Also, Habakkuk doesn't show up in Daniel 6. Like, we just have random Habakkuk coming in here, which is great. Probably my favorite prophet of the Old Testament. Love Habakkuk. Um, but
If he's being serious, you guys. Our first episode was a test episode on Habakkuk. It is archived, it is hidden away. If we, I think we should set a goal for ourselves, and if we ever hit that goal, we release that episode.
okay, yeah, I like that.
I like that too. But to get back to this, like it's just wild how much Daniel is like stirring things up.
Mm-hmm.
And like he kind of gets himself thrown into the lion's den.
Yeah, yeah, but I think there's some important things that we should be noting as in the story as a whole.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm going to be stepping out of my historical critical shoes that I like to stand in so often and kind of look at this more as a my literary critical tools. And we'll look at food. How is food used in this story? And I think food is the very intentional tool that is used here to kind of show what the point of the point of the story. Like, we understand the story by looking at the food, and the food obviously in the first story can't be fed to the god. The bell requires that food be given to him, that that he consumed, but Bell can't consume. And then we see again with the dragon. The dragon is fed the cake and he can't consume it. He explodes. But then we see the reversal in with Daniel, where God is the one that provides Daniel with food, and then he's able to eat the food. So there's this correlation between life and death with food. If you don't eat, there's death. And if you do eat, there's life. And the God of Israel, Daniel's God, is seen as this providing figure of food, and says, "Hey, I'm going to give you food." It's compared to these nasty Babylonian gods who can't even eat and ask to be fed themselves. So I think that's the overarching point of this book, that we can like see through how food is used.
I agree. It's just slam dunk after slam dunk on these poor Babylonian gods.
Yeah.
Like this is and I know you've told me this before. I know you've told me that this is like how it was written with the intention it was written to like there was this feeling back then of like my God is better than yours. But
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the first time in text that it's really come across for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what we've talked about, what episodes we've released. We see this in Habakkuk a little bit, which we didn't release that episode, but and I think that's why Habakkuk is used here, because in Habakkuk 2:18 and 19, I think I did one of uh, my master's thesis. Part of it was on Habakkuk, so I have verses from Habakkuk in my brain. But Habakkuk 2:18 and 19 is part of the woe oracles, and it ends the woe oracles. And it's Habakkuk saying, like, "Woe to you who have idols and are like that are made with your hands and stuff." And it's this like smashing critique of idols, like, don't have idols. So that could be a very big reason why Habakkuk is chosen here. Another reason Habakkuk could be chosen is based on his name, whose name is not entirely sure. We're not entirely sure what his name means, but it could be an Akkadian word that means cucumber or pumpkin or something like that. So what prophet would be better to feed Daniel than the prophet cucumber? So that's a idea. I don't take much faith in that one. I don't think that the original authors of this knew Akkadian enough to know that connection, but I think it's a possibility and it might be worth considering.
Nope, I'm sold. They thought, hey, let's bring in Prophet Pumpkin,
Yep.
and God is going to provide you with real food and food of a different means. No, that's crazy. It's such a good story, and it I don't know. I felt like there was a different tone to this than other things we've read
Mhm.
in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
which I
No,
know it will be different because it isn't necessarily written at the same time as those.
yeah, and also this is going to be a detour. Also, part of talking about religion, part about talking about religious studies, is that it's impossible not to be part of the narrative as something so personal and broad as religion. There's no way for me to explain this down the line unbiased. So we talk about what we're going to be making episodes about for the most part, but I think for the most part, I kind of guide the way of like things that I think you would be interested in, and that would be good for this podcast. So a lot of the things that I've been choosing so far, Esther, Jonah, the first creation narratives, are some of the more fun texts. There, which is another reason why I chose this one. I'm choosing the fun and engaging and wild and obscure texts that are fun and weird to talk about, and and obviously that puts a skew on the Bible that like we aren't talking like we haven't talked about Leviticus yet. I don't know if I've said the word Leviticus on this podcast yet, which is a very, very different genre of literature than the narratives that we see here. And the Psalms and the poetry is a very different genre of literature than we see here. So I think part of that is as we talk about religion, whether we're religious or not, anyone who talks about religion becomes embedded in the story of it, and there's no way to separate ourselves from that. So that could very well be a reason why we're seeing a difference here with Bell and the Dragon, is because it's not like there's not really jokes happening here. Like this isn't really a funny haha text like Jonah or Esther might be. It's a little more serious, a little more um, uh, polemical that's trying to get a point across in a very clear argument, as opposed to some of the other texts which might not be doing that as clearly. And this is our first apocalypse that we've talked about. Daniel as a whole is generally seen as apocalyptic literature, especially chapters 7 through 12. That's very, very clear apocalyptic literature using very, very clear apocalyptic imagery. Whereas here, I think it's still apocalyptic to an extent, but not to the extent as Daniel 7 through 12.
Well,
Does
I'm
that
a
track?
fan. Yes,
Yeah.
it tracks, and I think this is a good place to end it unless you have anything else.
No, I think this is a fine place to end it. Um, I think there's interesting things that the author is using with the bodies of all these characters, the bodies of Daniel, the body of Habakkuk, and how they traverse through space. I think that's very intentional. I should mention this, but I don't need to go into my big rant about how bodies and space are used in this text. But I will say, I think it's very important to note that Daniel is in diaspora. He's outside of Judah, and Habakkuk is in Judah or Judea, however we want to call it at that point. Habakkuk is in the land of the God of Israel, and it's often we often think of back then as gods having kind of control over land, which is why when the Babylonians captured Israel initially, that it was kind of assumed that their God won that fight, and we're kind of denigrating the God of Israel because the Babylonians and therefore the God of the Babylonians kind of beat the God of the Israels, the God of Israel. So what's happening here is by traversing from Judah to Daniel, it's kind of making this broader claim that the Babylonian gods may have dominion in their space, but the God of Israel has dominion in Israel, but also the whole world. And it's kind of making this larger claim about their God being so much bigger than the pesky little Babylonian gods. And it's just another argument against that. And I think that's an important one that might get overlooked.
Yeah, like our God is truly better than yours. He can go where your gods can go, but your gods can't go where our God can go.
Definitely, yeah.
Love that. It really, it just, it's, I don't know how to explain it other than like a middle school taunt fest to me. It's what I keep hearing in my brain, like people pointing and going, well, my God, well, my God.
Yeah,
So,
no, I think that's the general argument that was happening around this time. And then we have these diss tracts like this text here, kind of saying what's the whole point. Yeah, this is
diss
a
track.
diss track.
This is a diss track. You're so right. Oh,
Perfect. Well, I think that's all I have to say. Oh, I have so much more to say, but that's all I have to say for this episode, I guess. And unless you have anything else to say, I think we're good.
I think we're great. I think everyone who listened to this episode should go follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Amazon Music. Follow us not follow, subscribe to us on YouTube. You can see our beautiful faces as we talk, or you can just listen to the dulcet sounds of our tone, dulcet sounds of our voices. My brain is fried. I've picked up a lot of dog poop this week, guys. I have a new job. It's great. But thank you so much for joining us today at the Religious Treehouse, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, and email Matthew hate mail. Thank you. Don't worry, buddy. I got you.
Yeah, thank you.
I got
I
you.
would like one email that's like just an email. What's the point of having an email if you're only going to get people to message you on Instagram?
It's so true. And you know what? Most of our hate comments aren't even for you.
No, I give me
No.
some hate. I'd love to receive it. I'd love to be like, oh my goodness, I've evoked enough emotion out of this guy to be angry at me. I want someone to be
Listen,
angry at me.
if I could give you the ability to upset people, I would. I
Yeah.
would. The hate
Listen,
comments make me cry.
I thrive on conflict.